The Rich Pauper. Zachariah Yerucham and Nachum Tuvia learnt much during their stay in Vilna. They found veritable treasures of literature and rare manuscripts in the synagogues, which they had never seen before. They also met many famous scholars in this city, which was known throughout Jewry as the Jerusalem of Lithuania. While they were in Vilna, there died there the well-known Jewish philanthropist Shalom Shachner Sarkis, the brother of Rafal Shlomo, who was known in Vilna as the Rich Pauper. They were both sons of Avram, who was called the beloved Avraham, and he was the son of Shimon Doktorovich of Krakow, one of the founders of the famous Vilna synagogue built in the year 1563. This Shimon Doktorovich, together with his partner Yisrael, used to pay the government for the right to build houses and shops all over Poland and Lithuania, which they used to rent out. They did very good business indeed, but being both very fine Jews, they always paid 10% of their profits to charity, in their case, a most substantial sum, but they gave it gladly. Avram was the only son of Shimon, and, as can be imagined, he had the best of everything. His father provided him with the best tutors obtainable, but somehow Avram lacked the talents necessary to make a student. Avram's virtue lay in his good-heartedness and generous nature. He seemed to sense everyone, be he in the most out-of-the-way corner of who was in need of help. Avram lost no time in giving the necessary assistance with a generous hand. When he was only 15 years of age, his father Shimon made him his treasurer of the money he had put aside for charitable purposes, and entrusted to him the apportionment of this money as he thought fit. At the age of 18, Avram married the daughter of the Gaon, Rabbi Yisrael, the son of the Gaon, Rabbi Shalom Shachna of Lublin, the pupil of the well-known Rabbi Yaakov Pollack of Prague. Avram's bride was named Sarah, and she was as good-hearted and hospitable as her husband. She became known throughout the whole area for her generosity, charitableness, and hospitality. They were, in truth, followers of their namesakes in the Torah, Avram and Sarah. When King Sigmund August made Vilna his town residence, he gave orders that the city was to be beautified with buildings worthy of his legal presence. It was then that the two partners, Shimon and Yisrael, came to Vilna, and, in addition to their other places of business, established here a new office. They began to build houses and shops and rented them out. They also procured orders from the government to build houses and mansions for all the ministers and high government officials who would now wish to settle in Vilna. The two partners showed their spirit of enterprise by bringing from abroad the best architects and builders to be had, and the result was most gratifying. They made a mint of money out of their venture. It was at this time, too, that they built the famous Vilna synagogue. After a few years, the two partners decided to dissolve partnership, which they did according to the conditions prescribed by a Beis Din of 3. Shimon was over 60 years of age when he handed over his business to his son and two sons-in-law, and devoted himself entirely to Torah study and social service. Because of his most valuable connections with the highest government officials, and even with the king himself, the Vilna community invited him to become their intercessor, their mediator, between themselves and the government whenever necessary. Shimon was very successful in his communal work. The Vad Arba Aratzis, Council of the Four Lands, under whose auspices he was elected, a body representing all matters of Jewish interest and concern, was delighted with its choice of a leader. He made the fullest use of his privileged position and was able to do many favors for his fellow Jews. When the seat of government was later moved to Krakow, he too followed so that he should be able to continue with his communal work on behalf of his Jewish brethren. Avram was now a busy and successful businessman, but this did not deter him from carrying on with his work of charity, which was as dear to him as life itself. People used to say about him that not only did he distribute charity in the form of money, but he at the same time distributed love, which often meant more to the poor and lowly than the financial help of which they were so badly in need. Thus it was that Avram earned for himself the name, the beloved Avraham. And as lovable and kind as Avram was, his wife Sarah was 10 times more so. She put her whole life and soul into her charitable work among the poor and needy, and was to them a mother and a sister. She used to spend hours every day in the poor slum houses of Vilna, tending the sick, encouraging the troubled ones, and doing everything for the poor women who lay in confinement. Avram and Sarah had two sons, the elder named Shalom Shachna and the younger Rafal Shlema. When Shalom Shachna was 14 years old, his mother took him with her when she went to the houses of the poor, for she felt he ought to see how the majority of the Jews lived in poverty and suffering. She often bade him change his clothes with some poor child, saying, "You know, my child, he is much more learned in the Torah than you, and as our sages say, take care of the children of the poor, for Torah shall go forth from them." Sarah brought up her second son also in the same spirit of consideration for the poor and care of them. Avram and Sarah kept an open house for everybody in need, and it was indeed a refuge for the poor as well as a center for the learned. They had a house specially built for as a guest for wayfarers, and many people, scholars in particular, readily made their way towards it. Despite their great wealth, Avram and Sarah always dressed simply, and in no way did they ever give anyone the impression that they thought themselves superior in any respect. Because of his father's connections with the government officials and officers of high rank, Avram too made their acquaintances, and they came to him with their business affairs. Thus he was able to be the mediator between his fellow Jews and these nobles. This was a good thing for the Jews, for they were then able to do business with them or rent from them their inns, mills, or rivers and lakes for the purpose of fishing. They also rented from them plots of land for cultivating gardens and orchards. And through Avram's mediation, hundreds, even thousands of Jews left the large towns where they had to struggle to make a living and went with their families to the country towns and villages where they found it much easier to make ends meet. There arose, however, a new problem out of this emigration into the country, the problem of supplying these Jews with a sufficiently Jewish environment, as well as seeing that their children had an adequate Jewish education, and in general to avoid the danger of these Jews losing contact with their fellow Jews in the larger Jewish communities. This great and many-sided problem was taken up at a meeting of the Vad Arba Aratzis in Krakow, and it was decided to appoint suitable supervisors who would undertake to look after these new villagers and be the connecting link between them and their father communities in the towns. Avram's father Shimon gave a large sum of money for this purpose, considering it a very worthy cause, which it certainly was. Avram took every opportunity of doing a good turn for a Jew, and whenever a Paritz approached him for a loan, he made one of the conditions of granting the loan to the Paritz in question a promise to appoint a Jew as one of the overseers of his estate. In every case, the appointment proved a great success to the mutual satisfaction of both parties. The Paritz found that his Jewish employee brought him in substantial profits and was therefore more than ready to accept Avram's condition in the future. He, the Paritz, also told his friends what good workers the Jews were and what fine fellows, so that a double purpose was served. The Jews were provided with jobs, and the nobles acquired a good opinion of Jews. Gradually, more and more Jews settled in the villages, and little by little, small communities were formed, which grew and developed into larger communities, when their spiritual as well as material welfare could better be taken care of. When Avram's sons were still young children, he established a kind of loan fund to assist poor Jewish stallholders in the marketplace who were in need of ready cash. He trained his sons to see the importance of this form of charity so that they should always continue on their philanthropic path he had trodden out for them. The great philanthropist and intercessor Shimon died at the age of 85. In his will, he stated that 1/4 of his wealth should go to charity, and, with the consent of his son Avram, the money should be distributed by the Vad Arba Aratzis as they thought fit. The remaining 3/4 he left to his son and daughters. The son, who was the eldest child, was to receive 2/3 of this amount, but his wife very generously suggested to her husband that the third, which she was to receive because he was the eldest child, should go to charity, particularly for the advancement of Torah study. This would involve having houses of study built, Sefer Torah written, supplying the scholars with all the books they needed for their libraries, and in general helping yeshivas and Talmud Torahs with their requirements. When Avram's two sons, Shalom Shachna and Rafal Shlomo, grew to manhood, he married them to wives who were ready and happy to follow in the path of philanthropy of their husband and parents-in-law. Their houses had ever open doors, offering a welcome to scholars and a refuge to all who needed it. Little by little, the two sons took over the management of their father's business affairs, leaving in more and more free time to devote to Torah and charity. Still, however busy they were kept by business matters, they never failed to devote some of their time to charitable causes, and their wives were always happy to join them in their good work, encouraged greatly by their mother-in-law's shining example of unselfish devotion to the needs of the poor. Thus it was that the whole family, old and young, gave themselves up to the great work of charity. The two brothers dispensed charity in individual ways, each according to his point of view. For instance, the older brother, Shalom Shachna, could never allow himself the luxury of staying at home in comfort and warmth during the cold winter nights. When he thought of the poverty and discomfort of the poor Jews of the town, he would therefore wrap himself up well, and arming himself with a bag filled to capacity with cash, he would set off for the poor quarter of Vilna and make his round. In one place, he would notice that the wind was blowing through a chink in the wall of an old house. In another, he would see that a new oven was wanted. Here, he would observe that the roof was leaking, and there he would find that the people were in need of food and clothing, and so it would go on. In every case, he would give the poor folk the money for the things they needed, with a kind word of encouragement, which would cheer them out of their misery. And if he found that he had not brought enough money to meet the requirements of his round, he would return home immediately and send along the amount he had been short of. Now, his brother Rafal Shlomo used to say that it was not enough that a person was charitable and gave money to the poor. He maintained that it was necessary to see that others also gave charity, and so, in addition to his own very generous contributions, he would arm himself with a box and go from door to door asking for money for the poor. He would knock at the doors, and when the householders came out, he would greet them saying, "Forget that I am the rich Rafal Shlomo. Imagine that I am a poor man who comes to you because he is in need of your contributions for the poor, and give as much as ever you can spare, and may the Almighty reward you for your generosity." And so, because Rafal Shlomo always used to say, when going collecting with his box, that he was the poor Rafal Shlomo, he earned the nickname the Rich Pauper. Rafal Shlomo would explain at the same time that he who induces another to do a good deed is worthy of greater credit than the doer. He felt he was doing the best he could by working for charity as well as giving it. He used to tell his customers that the Almighty welcomed the pennies of the poor more than the golden coins of the rich. His mother Sarah had asked him to total up each day's collection and himself add an equal amount for charity. Later, his mother also added a similar amount from her own pocket, so that the box collection total became considerably swelled. The proceeds from the box collections were put aside by Rafal Shlomo for Pidyon Shavuyim. For this was the period when the Catholic priests brought libels against the Jews, and it required vast sums of money to pay for the defense of these innocent victims against the false charges that were brought against them, and to obtain their release. Avram and Sarah lived to a grand old age, and when they died, they lived on in the charitable deeds of their children and grandchildren, who all carried on the family tradition of good deeds and philanthropy. When Vilna became the center of battle between the Russians and the Poles in the year 1655, the two brothers were already advanced in age. Their businesses were spread all over the country and were carried on by their sons and grandsons. As the Cossacks advanced nearer and nearer, the brothers arranged for the Jews of Vilna to be provided with wagons so that they could pack their belongings and move with their families to a place of safety. The scholars and their families were given priority. In all their rescue work, the brothers had the help of the Russian landowner Volkov, who owned a large estate near Schwincien. This estate was formerly the property of a Polish nobleman, and the transfer of ownership had been arranged by the two brothers. They also advanced him a loan on easy terms, and, as was their custom, they had at the same time prevailed upon the Russian to engage a Jew to manage his estate. The latter had so pleased Walkov that bringing him in substantial profits that he had ever since been very grateful to the two brothers Shalom Shachna and Rafal Shlema. On the 22nd day of Tammuz, a day before the Cossacks entered Vilna, wagons and carriages arriving from Walkov to bring the two brothers and their families and what they could take along to the safety of his estate. The two brothers were most reluctant to leave the city while there were still remained some Jews in Vilna. But the Gaon Reb Moshe Rivkes and the Gaon Reb Shabsai Kayan told them it was their duty to take advantage of this opportunity and take refuge where refuge was so readily offered them. When the two brothers returned to Vilna in the middle of Elul, they found the city in ruins. The major part had been destroyed by fire, which had raged for 17 days. As if by a miracle, the homes of the two brothers were untouched. It was though their good deeds had protected them. They quickly set about rebuilding the desolate city. They donated a large sum for this purpose, beginning with homes for the poor. The first of the brothers to die was Shalom Shachna, and his funeral was attended by tens of thousands of Jews and non-Jews who came to pay their last respects to the great benefactor and philanthropist. Rafal Shlema, the Rich Pauper, carried on with his work of charity until he felt he could do so no longer on account of his age and failing strength. So he called a meeting of the heads of the community and people of means and told them that the time had come when he must give up his task of going collecting money for the poor and needy. He told them he would only sell the privilege of taking over the box collection to the highest bidder. The proceeds, of course, to go to charity. The buyer was the wealthy Rachmil Cohen, who stipulated, however, that he was only prepared to contribute out of his own pocket a fifth of the daily total of his collections. Rafal Shlema refused to accept this condition until 6 other people, who were present at the moment, bound themselves to contribute the remaining 4/5. Rachmil Cohen carried on with the collections for 13 years, going through the streets of Vilna and knocking on the doors from house to house, with a collection box in his hand, bearing the words, "The Rich Pauper." He kept a full account of all the daily totals, which he wrote into a ledger. He added the fifth, which he had promised to contribute himself, and at the end of each week, the other 6 people who had committed themselves to making up the amount of the collection total came along and contributed the sum in question. The death of the Rich Pauper was mourned throughout Vilna. The two visitors, the mystic Reb Nachum Tuvia and the young genius of Nemrov, Reb Zachariah Yerucham, were astonished to learn of the philanthropy of this Rafal Shlema and of all his family.